to Clear Out. I'm your host, Nihal Qatar. Usually I'm joined by my brother Sahil, but today we actually have our first ever guest in the podcast history. We have on Bobby Karalla, the digital content manager for the Dallas Mavericks. He creates content for them over on YouTube and Twitch, also at Mav Studio 41 on Twitter. He also has his own Twitter account as well. We'll put the link to all those in the description down below, so make sure you go check him out. If you have thoughts about this episode or questions or insight you want to send to us, make sure you email us at clearoutpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you guys. We had a listener question for Bobby today. You can also follow us at ClearOutPod on Twitter, but without further ado, I do hope you enjoy the interview. All right, we got Bobby Karalla on the line. Bobby, how you doing today?
I'm good, man. Thank you for having me. How are you?
Thanks for coming on the show. I'm doing well as well. Before we get into the Mavericks, where can people find you? And find your work, rather.
So people can find me anywhere online, man. I'm terminally, perpetually on the internet. If you want to follow me on Twitter, it's just at Bobby Karalla. But most importantly, I'm doing stuff with the Mavs, for the Mavs on their YouTube channel. With a production studio called Studio 41. So we're making, highlights, analytical XO breakdowns, some entertaining stuff too. So it's all on the Mavs YouTube channel, the Mavs Twitch channel. That's definitely where I'd hope people go.
Yeah, you also, I don't know if you know this, but you show up in the BR Live app quite a bit for like the
Oh,
Mavericks
do I?
time.
Really?
Yeah, my dad loves that. So when we're watching like Bucks Mavs games, I always see your tweets and I'm like, hey, I know that dude.
Well, it's good to know. I actually did not know that, but it's good to know that I end up there too.
Yeah, absolutely. First thing, obviously, the biggest news in the last few weeks is the Mavs traded for Kyrie Irving. What's the buzz like in Dallas around the team? How are fans responding to this? Is it overwhelmingly positive? Is it mixed? How do you see the fans reacting to this?
Yeah, I mean, purely from a basketball standpoint, people are overjoyed. I'm not sure how up to speed you are with the Mavs fan base, but recently a disgruntled fan painted a Send Luca Help mural in Deep Ellum, which is kind of an artsy bar neighborhood in Dallas. Yeah, I mean, fans are very, very vocal here about the Mavs' need for another superstar. They need, to send Luca some help, put some more talent around him. He's a one-man team and all this stuff. And so pretty much out of nowhere, they just trade for Kyrie Irving on a Sunday afternoon. And it's like, okay, well, the Mavs just traded for maybe the third or fourth best player that they've ever had. Just out of the blue, they got him. And, they gave up Spencer Dinwiddie, Dorian Finney-Smith, and a pick. But in today's era, you trade for a superstar, you're giving up like everything you got. And so I think the fact that they got that player at the price that they got him for, people are just really, really stoked. And he made his debut a couple days after that, and they won 2 games without Luka that he played in. And so that was another huge thing, because to that point in the season, the Mavs had won 0 games this season when Luka didn't play. So just all in all, on the court, people are completely thrilled. Now, off the court, obviously, that's another story. But purely from a basketball standpoint, I mean, the sky is the limit for what these guys can do, and I'm just really, really excited to see kind of how they come out of this break and how they can kind of rally around each other and try and make the playoffs down the stretch here.
No, I like what you said about they gave up a lot. I mean, Dorian Finney-Smith, probably the most important wing defender on the team, and Spencer Dinwiddie, obviously, you're getting Kyrie back, so it seems like that's definitely worth it. For me, like, hanging on to Josh Green, and we'll get to him a bit, is huge, because I love Josh Green. You did a great video breakdown on Josh Green early in the season on YouTube, so you guys should definitely go check that out if you haven't seen that before.
Thank you.
I think we've seen one game with Luka and Kyrie so far since the trade. I think a lot of people point to that last possession where they're kind of passing back and forth. For me, I feel like they're going to work that out, right? Kyrie has a lot of experience playing off ball with LeBron. And obviously, there's Kevin. He played on a team with Kevin Durant and James Harden as well. I think there's a big question of, can Luka play off ball? I mean, we haven't really seen that since Real Madrid days. Or, I think he might have played a little bit off ball for Slovenia when he was younger. How do you see that backcourt transition going forward? I guess, ultimately, do you think it can work with both of them in the backcourt? They're obviously both great players, great offensive players. Is there a reason for concern, or do you see this working out well?
I don't really see any concern. Going back to last season, now the Mavs had three of these guys. They had Luka, Jalen Brunson, and Spencer Dinwiddie. Now they rarely played all at once, but generally their philosophy after the Porzingis trade, when they got Dinwiddie, from that point until they lost in the conference finals, was basically whether it's Luka or Brunson or Dinwiddie, whoever the guard is that has the ball in their hands, they're going to go mismatch hunting on offense. And so if, the other team's got their best defender on Luka, well, hey, can Luka get a favorable switch? If not, swing it over to Jalen Brunson and let Brunson cook his guy, or at least try to. And so I think that they can kind of do that same exact thing with Luka and Kyrie, because you look around the whole NBA, really, there are a few teams maybe that have a guard stopper that can maybe cause Kyrie problems. And there's a few teams that have guys that do cause Luka problems too, but there's zero teams that have guys that can guard both of them. And so Dallas will always have a favorable matchup to exploit, or at least target on the offensive end. And so I think that both of those guys, like you said, Kyrie's got a ton of experience playing with LeBron, and Kevin Durant too, to a degree. Even though I think Luka, his offensive game is a little more like LeBron's than KD's, but Kyrie's got a wealth of experience. For Luka, this is kind of new for him, so I do feel like there will be some adjusting. He's played a little bit off the ball in terms of just like watching Brunson or watching Dinwiddie go to work. He's done a little bit of posting up and, some off-ball stuff to get him a clean catch going downhill. But for the most part, he's been the Mavs point guard, bringing the ball up the floor, initiating almost everything, responsible for like 60 to 70% of the points the team scores whenever he's on the floor, whether he's scoring it himself or passing it to somebody. And so it will be a little bit of an adjustment for him. But I think in that Minnesota game, that the first game they played together at home, Dallas is down like 25 points. It was brutal, and then all of a sudden Kyrie just went nuclear for 26 points in the fourth quarter. And I think Luka seeing that up close and like being a part of that and being willing to let Kyrie keep going, just sort of get out of his way. I think that's a really, really good sign that he was able to recognize that in the moment. Like, oh, he's hot. Let's make sure he keeps shooting it. Like, I'm happy to take a back seat. I feel like the fact that he was showing that so early makes me pretty optimistic that they'll be able to find a really good balance between the two.
Absolutely. I think one of the most important things here is you're all in the playoffs, at least. You're pretty much always going to have either Luka or Kyrie on the court, and that's totally new in the Mavs experience. Obviously, Brunson was great last year, but it's not the same level.
Yeah, different caliber player, man.
Absolutely.
Just different caliber.
Absolutely. Switching to the defense, I'm sure like you've had to talk about the defense a lot when people ask you about, if you're doing radio hits and such, when people are talking about the Mavs. Dorian Finney-Smith, you can argue, was the most important defender. He's gone. In my opinion, at least, it seems like Reggie Bullock has taken a step back maybe this year, as opposed to last year when he was really solid on defense. In the playoffs, who do you think is the most important wing defender on this team?
The most important wing defender now that Dorian is gone? Dude, I love Dorian so much. I was legitimately sad
awesome.
for like 2 hours after they did that trade. Yeah, he's so cool. And very good. But their most important wing defender now is also their most important rim protector. That's Maxi Kleber. He's been out since like mid-December. And he misses a lot of time every year. He's kind of had some knee issues, back problems. I think some foot issues throughout his career, and he's like 30, 31. So, getting up there a little bit, and he's missed some time. But, if you watch the Mavs playoff run last year, you know how valuable he was, not only as a big man, because he was giving them basically like 30 to 35 minutes a night at center, but he can also switch onto wings and even onto some guards, maybe not like Dame or Steph, these really quick guys that you got to chase around the perimeter, but he can switch and guard people like, Giannis, or James Harden or LeBron, these bigger, stronger, Kawhi, Paul George, people like that have a little more size, maybe play a little slower. He can guard them. And now, like if you're trying to envision a path to the finals through the West, you have to think, okay, who do the Mavs have that can guard anybody on the Suns? And Reggie Bullock, I thought, did a really good job against Chris Paul last year and a pretty good job against Devin Booker, which would leave maybe Maxi Kleber or maybe Josh Green, he's becoming a little bit of a stud. One of those two guys or both of them is going to have to guard KD. And, that is a huge, huge problem. So I think their most important wing defender is probably Maxi. then Reggie Bullock behind him just because he can soak up so many minutes. And then Josh Green, he's like newly inserted into the starting lineup now that Finney-Smith is gone, and Luka missed some time, so Josh was getting a ton of minutes before that too. But now that he's a starter, now that he's going to be expected to play like 30, 36, sometimes 40 minutes in a game down the stretch, if he can respond well and keep playing with the level of energy that he does whenever he usually comes off the bench and can just run like crazy for like 8 minutes and then sub out, and sit out till the next half. If he can play with that level of manic energy for 32 minutes a game, then maybe the most important wing defender is him. But until then, in my opinion, it's Maxi Kleber.
Yeah, Jackson Frank for SB Nation just did a really nice article on Josh Green. I mean, it's not only offense, or it's not only defense. The defense is 4.5 points better per 100 possessions when he's on the court. So, I mean, he has obviously made an impact on defense. He's shooting 41% from three. He's big in transition. Is this, I mean, you're obviously really plugged in with the Mavericks. You watch them every single night. Was this an expected step for Josh Green, or has this been like a complete surprise for you guys?
It was definitely expected that he'd be able to be a rotation player, which last season, I mean, even that's like not a super high threshold, right? Like, can you just play 15 minutes a night? Last year, the answer toward the back half of the season was yes. But once we reached the playoffs, it was kind of like, oh my God, he's kind of afraid to shoot. Utah was completely ignoring him. Phoenix pretty much ignored him the whole series, and then he barely played at all, for the rest of the postseason after that. And so, the big missing piece for him, in my opinion, was purely all confidence. He could shoot the ball, he can run the floor, he can defend multiple positions, play with a ton of energy, crash the glass at both ends of the floor very well. He's a really good passer, but the last thing that was missing, the only step forward he needed to take in his game, in my opinion, was just believing that he was good. Being willing to step into a shot, being willing to take his guy off the dribble. If Luka's double teamed and you get the ball, are you going to freeze or are you going to make a quick decision? And that kind of stuff, the mental aspect of the game, he is just completely, it's night and day compared to last year. Just completely different player on the floor. He looks like he believes he belongs out there. He looks like he believes he's very good, and he's playing with it. And it's not just like he's not just productive, right? Like, he's got like a little bit of a swagger about him. He got into it with KD earlier this season. He's one of the only Mavs not named Luka to have picked up a technical foul this season. Like, he gets a little chirpy out there and a little chippy, and he gets physical and fouls hard and plays hard. And, that gives such an energy boost to this team, because otherwise Dallas usually plays such a slow, plodding brand of basketball. Luka walking up the floor, getting everybody into position, and then going to work. Josh is really the only guy up until they got Kyrie that can just completely dominate a defense in the open floor. Just take the top off the defense in transition, and that's been a huge efficiency boost too. But yeah, I mean, all the on-off stuff with him is so favorable. Offensive rating, defensive rating, a lot of like the four-factor stuff is good too for him. And now to the point where like I'm confident rolling him out for 35 minutes a game in a playoff series, which I was not expecting to be the case, even like 2 or 3 months ago. But the one kind of final frontier for him is, can you defend those really, really superstar level, high level players without committing a bunch of ticky-tack fouls? And he's still only like 22, so I don't expect him to get that for another couple years. But that's like the last thing. If you want to use your body, if you want to take some gambles, if you want to crash the boards hard at both ends, can you do that without just going a little too far and picking up 3 fouls in the first half? So that's kind of the last thing. But otherwise, man, I've been so impressed by what he's done this season.
He is one of my favorite like under the radar players to watch on League Pass. Because, I mean, he's not, you might look at his numbers and think, oh, he's like a 3-and-D guy, but he's so athletic. He can put the ball on the floor and take it to the hoop. And like I said, and like you said, he's really, really good in transition as well.
Let me ask you this actually.
Yeah.
I want to get an outsider opinion on this.
Sure.
Because for so long, like fans were kind of low on him, and then you see flashes and you're like, okay, if he pans out, he can be this player. And for so long, Mavs fans kind of agreed on one guy, and I'm curious, now that you've seen him for a whole year, who do you think, or what kind of archetype or prototype do you think he can become, like, if he pans out, reaches his full potential?
Wow, an archetype. I mean, I think there are so few 3-and-D players that have the freedom to play like he has, if that makes sense. I think a lot of guys are
Yeah.
kind of pigeonholed into their role. He kind of reminds me of like a mini Jason Tatum. I don't think he'll be that good because, Jason Tatum's a top 10 player in the NBA. But I think there's a lot of... He has... His skill set kind of reminds me of him. Jason Tatum obviously has a really high shot point. Like, it's almost impossible to guard him. But as far as guys who can be 3-level scorers and play elite defense, like, that's the first name that comes to mind. I'm curious, who do fans compare him to? The Mavs fans.
Well, so that's a very impressive answer and shows how far we've come because before the season started, now this guy's an incredible player too,
Yeah.
Maybe a Hall of Famer, but before the season, fans were like, man, if he can reach his ceiling, he could be like a poor man's Andre Iguodala.
Oh, that's actually a really good
wing,
comparison.
yeah, high level defender, a wing with ball skills that can run the floor.
Mm-hmm.
But now, man, I mean, Iguodala at his peak was like a borderline all-star caliber player. Green is displayed like what you were saying, dude. Green can drive the lane and he finishes like 65-70% at the rim. He scores 62% on his drives. He's shooting 40 plus from three. Like Iguodala was never that efficient from anywhere on the floor, and he never really had that 3-point shot in his bag. And so it's like, I don't know. Like it feels like Green is gonna bust out of the 3-and-D sort of if you want to call it an archetype or almost like a label. It's like a kiss of death calling a guy a 3-and-D player because it implies that they're limited on offense. He's got a really advanced skill set. So I don't know. I don't know how many players we've seen like him before. Like maybe like shorter Blake Griffin, like in his Pistons days, like whenever he wasn't a super athletic freak, but he could still make passes and operate and kind of almost be like a pseudo point guard. But I haven't seen many players like him before.
Right, and that's why I say Jason Tatum. Like I said, he's not... I mean, he could be. Josh Green, I guess, could be. I'm a Bucks fan. We know growth is not linear. Giannis has such a unique path to greatness. That being said, like, I don't think Josh Green is going to be a Jason Tatum level player, but
It would be sick if he was.
Yeah, I mean, well, if you got Kyrie, Luka, and Jason Tatum, I mean, you could be the best team in the NBA, but you're right. It's so hard to compare him one for anybody that is just the first name that came to my mind because, man, he's got such a cool skill set. If any of you guys out there, if you have not been watching the Mavs and now you're going to because Luka and Kyrie are there, definitely watch out for Josh Green. I think he has been playing even more minutes. He's going to continue to play more minutes. You have two now elite floor tilters, I guess, on the floor. He's going to have space to operate. It's going to be really fun to watch him continue to grow. I really like what you said about Kleba. I mean, he's missed some time. He's so integral to this defense. And I was just looking, through Cleaning the Glass, and I saw this lineup of Doncic, Green, Hardaway, Kleba, and Christian Wood are like plus 31. Obviously, really small sample size. But they have a 109 defensive rating. So it just got me thinking, what do you think is the closing lineup? What do you think is the best defensive lineup the Mavs can put out there? And maybe including Kyrie, because, I mean, Kyrie's going to close, right? So if you have Luka, if you have Kyrie, who are the other three guys in the final 4 minutes of the game you want on playing? And let's look at the teams we're playing in the West. So teams like the Clippers, Suns, you don't necessarily need to play with two bigs. So yeah, well, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean that's the tough part because even going back to the KP days, and this was like Luka KP year one, so we're talking 2019-20. Mm-hmm. The team kind of had this hunch that KP and Maxey were going to be really good together, and they were for a while, and then they kind of fell off a little bit. But then they were always good after that, like in 2021, 21-22. Mm-hmm. Maxey was always really good playing next to another big. He was always really good playing next to Dwight Powell off the bench in 2017-18. In fact, they were so good together in 2017-18 that the Mavs had to stop playing them together because they were trying to get Luka. And so, Maxey has always been really good playing alongside another big. Offensively, if he's your five and you surround him with wings, that's fantastic. You can play five out. Luka and Kyrie have all sorts of space to work, and you're going to score a bajillion points per 100 possessions. And Christian Wood can sort of fit into that offensively because he's another stretch big. And so you just have all sorts of spacing. But defensively, I'm not really sure why Maxey and Wood have worked together so well defensively this year. Now it is, small sample. Maxey only played like a month and a half without getting before he got hurt, but they were dominant. I think part of that is because they played against backups a lot, and that's always going to help. Those are two starting caliber players. Maxey is like at his best, he's like a borderline all defensive team kind of player. Wood, maybe not so much, but he can get you buckets on the other end of the floor, and Maxey can protect Wood. But closing games in the playoffs, if it started right now, if you're playing Phoenix, you got to deal with Chris Paul, Booker, KD, Ayton, TJ Warren, or whoever the fifth player is going to be. Former future Mav Terrence Ross, is on Phoenix now. I think you got to go, Luka and Kyrie, like you said. Josh Green has got to be out there. And then I think it depends that fourth spot, if you go Reggie Bullock or Tim Hardaway Jr. or Christian Wood, maybe matchup dependent, but then also game situation dependent. So if the Mavs are playing from in front, I think you need Bullock out there for defense. If you're trying to come back, I mean, Bullock is a really good shooter, but maybe you put Tim Hardaway Jr. out there because that guy can just go Nova, at the drop of a hat. I think in your five spot, you got to have Kleba. He's that good, he's that important, and he's that valuable. But it does depend. If you're going up against Denver in the first round, Kleba does sometimes kind of get overwhelmed by Jokic, and you need to send double teams. Maybe you put Powell out there, JaVale McGee out there, but then obviously you're losing a lot on offense. So I think they have a lot of options. None of them are perfect, but that Maxey and Wood duo, I'm glad that you were able to spot that because that's been something they were like really, really insistent on keeping those two guys together on the floor, if at all possible, all the time before Maxey went down. And, I'm presumably he'll be able to play very soon here. And so I would expect that duo to be wreaking havoc again off the bench.
Yeah, no, that really caught my eye because that's such an interesting lineup that you wouldn't think would have. I mean, when I think Christian Wood, I do not think defense. So that was really impressive to me.
Yeah. I think some of that has to do with the way they stagger their rotations. Luka's playing the entire first quarter and the entire third quarter, and usually like the final 6 to 9 minutes of the second and the fourth quarter. And so you bring in Luka or you keep him in the game. Usually the other team is deep inside their bench with the final 2 or 3 minutes of the first and the third. The Mavs are bringing in Christian Wood and Maxi Kleber off the bench and giving Luka all sorts of space to just cook all your backups one by one, just systematically just annihilate your defense. And so even though they only play for maybe 2 or 3 minutes at a time, they're usually ending the quarter on an 11-4 blitz. And you do that enough times, you're gonna win a lot of games.
No, actually, that makes sense. That's really good perspective. I mean, who is the best rim protector on this team, do you think? Is it Kleba?
Really, really strong air conditioning that can maybe blow the ball off the glass. I mean, Maxey is that's a tough question.
I mean, so I guess I'm assuming then the answer is Dwight Powell isn't enough to be your primary rim protector.
Yeah, I mean, they like having Dwight out kind of close to the level of the screen, not totally switching, but they like him out closer to the action. I think their best rim protector is Maxey, but as someone that watches the Bucks all the time, yeah, you'll probably know what I mean by this. Maxey is a rim protector in the way that Giannis is. He's gonna swoop in from the weak side or sort of cover a lot of ground. Yeah, okay. He's not I mean, he can be your back line, right? He can be the guy that you funnel the ball handler into and everything, but he's way better as sort of that roaming guy that's gonna fly in at the last second and just send your thing into the third row.
Gotcha. Well, Serge Ibaka's out there, so something to consider.
Yeah, so is LaMarcus Aldridge, apparently.
Yeah, I saw that. Interesting. I mean, speaking of buyout guys, the Mavs brought in Justin Holiday. I mean, do you see him being a factor at all in the playoffs, at least defensively? He could shoot. How do you see him fitting into this Mavs rotation?
Yeah, I mean, he can shoot from the corner, and if you can do that, Luka loves finding those corner shooters, and the Mavs love taking them. They take more than any other team in the league, and so Holiday can kind of do the Reggie Bullock, Dorian Finney-Smith thing where you're just defending, you're switching, you're covering the toughest guy, and then at the other end, you're kind of chilling in the corner and waiting for that Luka kick-out pass. I think the more interesting question is if it's him or if it's Markieff Morris or if it's both. Like Morris isn't like a huge guy, but he does have positional size.
Mm.
Whereas Justin Holiday is like 6'5", 6'6", and he's listed, I think, at 180. And so, he's got really long arms, 7-foot wingspan, but he doesn't like have that thickness or that bulk that you need to defend a guy like Kawhi or LeBron, or Aaron Gordon or some of these other like bigger wings that you're going to need to slow down in order to get through the playoffs. And so I think having both of those guys is good. Now, I'd be curious to see if the Mavs could find a lineup to get both of them on the floor because that's a lot of defense. That's a lot of positional size in that case because you're playing Holiday in that way at like the 2 or the 3 instead of the 3 or the 4. So that could be good. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, Dallas is really, for a team that at the beginning of the year had a ton of positional size. Dinwiddie is 6'5", Dorian Finney-Smith like 6'7", 6'8", arms for days. After that Kyrie trade, they got a lot smaller, and so they got to find a way to get a little more beef on the floor. Otherwise, they're going to keep getting bullied by these bigger wings, and they're also going to keep getting bullied on the glass. And that's been 2 sore spots for them recently.
Gotcha. No, that makes sense. I mean, I also noticed looking through Cleaning the Glass that the Mavs give up the most points per play in transition and the highest percentage of transition buckets in the NBA, which is obviously not a good combo. Why do you think that is, and is that something that's fixable, do you think, going into the playoffs?
You can fix everything by working a little harder, I think, but I think it's like their defense is sort of at the mercy of their offense. You think of the way the Mavs spread the floor, they're putting Luka and Kyrie up top. You got your roll man rolling to the basket, and then you got your Bullock and Josh Green or Justin Holiday, Markieff Morris, or Tim Hardaway Jr. Those guys are in the corner. And those are your best athletes. They're your best defenders. They're the guys that are going to typically pick up the ball in transition and do the dirty work. But they have the most ground to cover to get back because they're ending the possession in the corner. And if you look at like PBP stats, for example, which does like points per possession based on prior event, the Mavs, after they score or after they like make a free throw or after a dead ball, they're like a top half defense in terms of pace, in terms of point per possession and everything. Like they're like pretty good. But off a missed 3, off a missed layup, off a missed free throw, they're like dead last in every single one of those categories. And I think part of that is because of the way they space the floor. Part of that is just effort. But I think there's one other thing that's kind of tougher to measure too, which is, Luka, his kind of whole offensive approach and the Mavs' philosophy as a team is to target the mismatch. And typically that means getting Luka matched up on the other team's best player. And if you do that, that's great because Luka's going to get a good shot or create a good shot for his teammates. But that also means if they miss, going back the other way, now all of a sudden Luka's guarding Steph or Luka's guarding Dame or Luka's guarding KD or one of these superstars. And that's really bad. You don't want that to be the case. So I think it's a little bit of the way they space the floor. It's a little bit of their approach. And also a whole lot of it is effort. I mean, they have to be better at getting back because, you give up like 12 or 14 fast break points that you easily could have avoided in a game. I mean, with as many close games as they've lost this year, that is a huge, huge problem to address.
Yeah, it certainly is concerning, but I mean, I guess it's a good thing that you think effort's at least a part of it. I mean, if that will definitely go up in the playoffs. So, I don't want to spend the entire time talking about Dallas's defense. You mentioned the speed in which Kyrie plays and the speed in which Josh Green was playing before Kyrie got there. How does Kyrie help the transition offense?
But you can just get the ball up the floor really quickly, And for a guy, he's like 6'1", 6'2", he gets a lot of rebounds, and if he's pulling down a defensive rebound, then it's just off to the races. Now, typically, unless you're like Josh Green or maybe Tim Hardaway Jr., if you're a Mavs player, you get a rebound, you are instantly looking for Luka, just instantly. And then Luka's going to trot it up the floor. Hey, make sure, hey, you get in the corner. Okay, no, you go to the right corner. No, Dorian, get out of the way. Dorian, go to the right corner. And then you get the floor space, and all of a sudden you only have 9 seconds left in the shot clock to do something. Kyrie can just turn nothing into something all the time, or at least get the ball up the floor earlier in the possession to where instead of having 10 seconds to break down the defense, you have like 17 seconds to break down the defense. And that does make a huge difference if over the course of 100 possessions in a game and 82 games in a season. So Luka is like the best at what he does, probably in the world, and one of the best of all time. Just half court offense. He is a complete and just complete sage, a complete mastery of half court offense. But with that comes a complete kind of like just ignoring, neglecting of transition offense. And so if Kyrie can just get a couple extra buckets per game in transition, make Luka work a little less, up the tempo a little bit, keep feeding guys, maybe get a couple lobs out of it, get the juices flowing a little bit, the blood pumping, then I think that could help them on defense too. Because right now, I mean, every single offensive possession for them is kind of like a science project, like they got the answer, but it's like solving a complicated math problem or like finding you're like splitting atoms on offense every single time. It's very arduous. It just takes a very long time, and it's kind of slow, and it's sort of all of a sudden you're so impressed watching Luka play basketball and break down his man that's like, oh my God, I need to get back on defense right now. LeBron is dunking, so I think just getting a little more pace, keeping everybody on their toes a little bit more, I think will have a better effect on the defense too.
I hadn't considered that. That's really interesting, and definitely something I'll be looking at going forward if that does help the defense. Um, so do you see like a Luka Kyrie 2-man game being a big part of the offense going forward? Or is it just going to be like a possession by possession basis, do you think?
I can see a little bit of both. Dallas doesn't really run a lot of set plays. Since they got Kyrie, they've actually run way more than they did beforehand. I mean, they're running him like off zipper screens. They're doing some pinch post stuff. A little bit of off ball action. They're using Dwight Powell as kind of this like pivot man at the top of the key, kind of like how Phoenix used to use DeAndre Ayton like before they got Chris Paul.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's interesting because you're introducing a lot more off ball movement into the offense. And even if in those instances, even if Kyrie and Luka aren't directly involved in the play with each other, like Kyrie's not screening for Luka or Luka's not screening for Kyrie, you're still doing something away from Luka. You can't have all five eyes trained on 77. You got to worry about Kyrie Irving too, who's cutting, and then you got a backdoor cut coming off of that, and you run some split stuff. Like you're just doing things away from the ball, which is really good. So I think eventually you're going to get to the point where Luka will either because he wants to or because he's being told to. I think Luka's going to set more ball screens for Kyrie, and that should just open up a world of options for both players coming off of that very simple action, and makes it to where it's impossible to double team either guy. And but it does take a little bit to figure out the steps to that dance. And they, until today, they hadn't practiced together a single time since the trade. So 6 straight games at home, no back-to-backs coming up. I would suspect over the next week or two, you're going to see a lot more creative interplay between those two guys on offense, more than just the my turn, your turn thing. But hey, the my turn, your turn thing has worked really, really well throughout both of their careers. And so I'm cool with seeing that too. But I think we're going to see a little more creativity over the next couple weeks.
My next question was going to be: is do you think Luka will turn or will screen more? Because we see, I think one of the more successful, I don't even really know if you can call it a play, but one of the more successful actions that the Mavericks have done, especially when Luka's being doubled at the point of the screen, is that short roll, and they usually have a guy open in the corner. If Luka can be the roller in that situation, or the screener rather, that would be phenomenal for the Dallas offense, I think, and open up just a whole new world of possibilities.
Yeah, teams like you're going to put your best guard defender on Kyrie, but your best guard defender is probably going to be like 6'2". You don't want that guy switched onto Luka because Luka, I haven't looked at this recently, but Luka over the last like 3 years has been the best or like the top 3 best post-up players in the NBA. He is going to destroy that guy, and so teams are going to have to do something. They're either going to switch or they're going to have to blitz Kyrie or whatever if Luka's your screener. And then it just comes down to, Luka picking out the open guy in the corner. If Dwight Powell can do it, if Maxi Kleber, Dorian Finney-Smith, Tim Hardaway, if those guys can do it, then I trust Luka with my life to run a 4-on-3 on offense every time down the floor. So that I think is the easily the most spammable action to run. Kyrie with the ball, Luka with the screener, to get either a wide open corner 3 every single time, or give Kyrie just a gaping driving lane because Luka's defenders is way too terrified to step away from him, and Kyrie's able to turn the corners to get a clean look at the rim.
Absolutely. I really do hope that's something that he adds, to his game and to this offense. All right, so last thing here, we did have a listener question from Pranav. The question is, will the Mavs have serious championship odds with Kyrie? I mean, let's reframe it. What do you think is the ceiling this season for the Mavs? Do you think they can win a championship? How do you see this back end of the regular season and playoffs going for the team?
And as Michael Jordan said, the ceiling is the roof. I think in a series, right, is you usually say the best player has the best chance to win, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and last year, Luka was the best player in that Suns series. He was the best player in the Jazz series. And before it was Luka, it was Jalen Brunson. And so the Mavs won both of those series, and it was great. And then all of a sudden, Steph was just really, really good, and Jordan Poole and the Warriors had way too much talent. But this year, you look out west right now, outside of Phoenix and I guess Denver with Jokic, there's a pretty good chance that the Mavs might have the two best players in any series, or certainly two of the top three players in every series that they'll play. And so you have that much top-level talent, you're going to give yourself a chance. But I think as much as we want to say that the NBA is star-driven and that winning is all based on your alphas and all that stuff, this year more than ever, because the Mavs are going to be rolling out some relatively unproven players alongside those guys. Josh Green never really played meaningful playoff minutes. Christian Wood never appeared in a playoff game, period.
Wow.
Tim Hardaway Jr. was injured for last season's playoff run. He didn't play at all. Now, he's been in a couple first-round series with the Mavs against the Clippers, but that's it, during his time in Dallas. A lot more questions this year, and an arguably shallower bench than they even had last season whenever it was basically Spencer Dinwiddie, and that's kind of it. Well, Dinwiddie's gone now, so there are a lot of questions, but they have two guys that can get you a lot of answers, pull them right out of thin air. And so I think their ceiling, especially if it takes Phoenix a little while to mesh, I think their ceiling is they could go to the finals. But I think their floor, if they can't figure out their defense, or if their, role players kind of get a little too nervous or whatever down the stretch, they might not even make the playoffs. I mean, they're currently the 8 seed right now. They're 2 games out of 4th or whatever, but they are not in a position to feel comfortable right now. So you got to win a lot of games down the stretch just to get into the playoffs. But once you get there, as long as they avoid Phoenix until at least the 3rd round somehow, I'm feeling really, really good about their chances in any series. But of course, in order to feel good, they have to get there first. And that in itself is going to be a big challenge.
Yes, the West is such a gauntlet. I mean, you just look at the teams right now. I mean, you have the Nuggets, the Grizzlies, the Clippers, the Suns, the Warriors, the Mavs. I feel like the fans of those teams believe that they can win a championship this year. They can at least make the finals. And the truth is, 2 of those teams are going to be out in the first round. So, I mean, it's going to be a gauntlet for the Mavs. But, yeah, I mean, if they do avoid the Suns until the conference finals, I do think you're right. I think I think I'm a little bit higher on the Mavericks than other people outside of Dallas, just because I think if you have Luka and Kyrie, I mean, that can win you a series, right? That literally, like you said, those 2 players can win you a series. So they'll definitely be exciting to watch. Bobby, thank you so much for coming on and for answering all my questions really well. You gave us some great insight into the Mavericks during this exciting time.
Hey, thank you for having me again, man. And if it's not going to be the Mavs this year, I do want Giannis to get a second one. I love Giannis, love the Bucks, love Drew Holiday. Really, really like Chris Middleton, Brook Lopez, Bobby Portis. Shout out my fellow Bobby. So if it's not going to be the Mavs, I do hope it is the Bucks again.
I really appreciate that, dude. I hope so too. Maybe we'll get a Mavs-Bucks final. We'll see.
Oh, dude, that would be epic. Let's go.
Yeah,
I'm
let's
down.
do it.
Sign me up.
Let's do it. Thanks so much, man.
Thank you.